Today we're going to have a look at an importance question, both in terms of how we actually answer it, but also it's worth our while to spend a little bit of time thinking about the content. This question we're going to have a look at today is going to relate to the long telegram. And before we get into the wording of the question and the issues of how to answer, I think it's important just to spend a moment looking at the context and to get a real grasp of what this long telegram is all about. So this is from the infographic looking at the development during this crucial early period of the Cold War. In the background, of course, we have throughout 44 to 48 Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe. You've got the Soviet establishing their buffer zone and sphere of influence, and we've got the use of salami tactics in order to achieve that. So in a sense, what comes next is the long telegram and also a telegram from Novikov. What follows quite soon afterwards is the Iron Curtain speech from Winston Churchill, which was considered provocative by Stalin, building into the containment policy 47 to 48 as demonstrated in the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. And ultimately, we get the extreme tightening of control from Stalin and a more coordinated approach to taking control of Eastern Europe, most notably through Comecon. So within that, of course, we have the long telegram, and that's what this question that we're going to look at today focuses on. I just want to spend a moment just to be really clear on what this word containment means, because it really is at the heart of your studies of the Cold War. It is the United States policy for much of it. And it's a policy which the aim of it is to stop the spread. Now, what I think is important to think about is the word itself. Let's look at a container, okay? Let's say that I have a container of liquid and the container's role is to stop that liquid from escaping, to stop anything else getting wet. The liquid within the container is where it stays. The container's role isn't to actually reduce the amount of the liquid that is there. It is simply to keep things as they are. That's really important to keep in mind with the idea of containment, because that's the reason why the United States don't see it as an aggressive policy, because they are accepting the state of affairs as far as the influence of the Soviets in Eastern Europe, but they are saying that they are now going to act if there's an attempt to spread that. So keep that in mind when you consider containment. It is a case of preventing further spread of communism. Now, the long telegram itself, I think it's worth just taking a moment just to refresh our memory as to what the long telegram itself actually is. And to help us with that, I highly recommend Tutor to You. I'm sure you're familiar with GCSE Bite Size. Hopefully you are by now anyway. And the resources which are in the folder that is provided for you. But I think this is really useful. The history section of Tutor to You, completely free and really high quality. They're very good at succinctly explaining these quite complicated and difficult to remember aspects. So let's see what it tells us about the long telegram. It says that Kennan was the ambassador of the United States to the Soviet Union. He had worked for the US State Department for a long time and built his reputation up within the US government. As such, his opinions on the Soviet Union were listened to in Washington. So this isn't anybody coming out with this. This is somebody who is considered to be an expert and considered to be somebody who is sensible to listen to in terms of the judgments and opinions he is putting forward on the issue of the Soviet strategy. Similarly, in that sense, to what follows up afterwards with Winston Churchill making his Iron Curtain speech. Again, it carries weight because Churchill is the great war leader. Churchill had a relationship of working with Joseph Stalin, therefore is considered to be somebody who can be relied upon for accurate judgments on the Soviet character and the Soviet intentions. So in his famous long telegram, Kennan warned that Stalin wanted to destroy capitalism and reported on Stalin's paranoia that the West were going to destroy him and the Soviet Union. To complement this, Kennan believed that the US should mount a strong defense against the Soviet Union, as this would stop Soviet aggression. This view and telegram contributed towards the development of the US policy of containment. So just to get my thoughts in place, something that we haven't done before, but I think is quite a useful strategy that you may or may not be familiar with, and I'm really going to take the risk here of putting my own fairly pathetic artistic skills to the test, is to visualize through pictures to get a better sense of what is happening. So if we have here, I'm going to have this piece of writing. That is my long telegram, okay? And what has led to the long telegram, what is influencing the long telegram? There's my, I think that's wrong completely, sign for communism, and it is the communist expansion, which has had an influence. We've also got, and this is one of the crucial parts, it's a common misconception. I marked literally yesterday. Don't tell them that, I've told them that I marked it ages before. But the year 10s did some exam questions, and they were looking at the long telegram. In fact, it's the question that we're going to look at today. And a really common misconception from them was the belief that the long telegram was a response to the Marshall Plan and the Soviet Union rejecting the Marshall Plan. It isn't. Where the long telegram comes from is from the US Treasury. So it is still to do with money, but they were confused as to why the Soviet Union had flatly rejected being involved in the new World Bank. And the World Bank, the idea of it was that there would be an international bank set up so countries could not completely collapse economically. They could take a loan from the World Bank or something called the IMF. Okay, so that is something which is clearly an organization which the United States, at least in theory, believe is to the benefit of everybody, but the Soviets were not having it. Okay, so we've got the background of the Soviet expansion into Eastern Europe. We've got the Soviet refusal to take part in the World Bank. And then we've got the long telegram itself. Now, if we come down to consider where the long telegram comes from, it is from George F. Kennan. There he is. In fact, I'm not convinced he wore glasses, so I might have unfairly tarred him with the visually challenged group that I myself belong to. But he was an ambassador to Moscow, so he is an expert. And so his expertise matters. He responds to the request from the US Treasury to explain why the Soviets haven't got involved in the World Bank. He responds with the long telegram. And as a result of the long telegram, the content of the long telegram essentially says that, here's my best possible drawing of a hand making a fist. Because what George F. Kennan says is that the Soviets only understand force. He actually uses a phrase where he says that they are impervious to reason, meaning that you can talk to them until the cows come home, but they're not going to listen to you. All they are looking for is there a way to take an advantage? And their ultimate aim, as stated in the long telegram, is to crush capitalism. Okay, so they are totally anti-capitalist. They want to crush it, and the only way to deal with them is to go in strong. Now, this has knock-on effects. We've got the effect, if we look at the knock-on effect for the West, first of all. So, the West, we've got, as I stated, we've got Churchill's it's my best effort at drawing a pair of curtains. Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, which he makes in 1946, which I should add is when the long telegram comes out. We've also got knocking on from that, and this man I know had glasses, and a very nice little side part in there. We get the Truman Doctrine, ultimately, and we also get, in an effort to address this, we get Marshall Aid, okay, which is that plan, the European recovery plan for the United States leading the rebuilding of Europe. Okay, so that's the Western response. We've also got the Eastern response, so that response from the Soviet Union. We get their own version of a telegram, the reply by a guy called Novikov, and we get the impression from Stalin. I mean, how could that not be Joseph Stalin? That is art of the highest order. Okay, Stalin is concerned that there is going to be an attack from the West, and this seems to back that up completely, that they are not to be trusted, and therefore what we ultimately see from the East is they begin, and they're in the process of taking measures to consolidate their position, whether that is Cominform, which is the political unity and cooperation, coordination of the satellite states. We've got Comecon, which is ultimately a response to the Marshall Aid, and we end up with a more aggressive policy towards Eastern Europe to take total control. And these elements of the West, of Churchill, of Truman Doctrine, and of Marshall Aid, all feed in to this idea of containment. Okay, so in terms of the exam question, the question that we're going to have a look at is explain the importance of the long telegram for relations between the superpowers. And that is worth 8 marks. And the importance question is, to be straightforward with you, it's the most important on the paper 2, the Cold War section of paper 2, because there are 2 of them. So you'll get 1 consequences question, you'll get 1 narrative question, and you will get 2 importance questions from a choice of 3. So mastering this type of question is absolutely fundamental to your chances of achieving your aims with a cracking mark. Now, looking at the question in terms of how we approach an importance question, it's important that we realise that this is different to the consequence question. Now, the consequence question is what did, whatever the event they point out and they highlight, what did it lead to? What was the result of it? Now, the importance question isn't radically different, because it's actually, certainly in terms of marks, it's the same setup. You've got AO1, which is your knowledge and understanding, your dates, your individuals, your people, your keywords. And you've got AO2, your conceptual understanding. Whereas AO2, the concept is all about consequence. This is an extent consequence, but also significance. Why did it matter? But the important key thing to know is that, to go a bit mathsy, it's to what extent did X have an effect on Y? And the X here is the long telegram, and the Y is relations between the superpowers. Now, the reason why I'm making a big deal about focusing on that is that, yes, it is common that the question they're going to ask is like this one, focusing on the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union, but it isn't always. They will sometimes ask a question where that why, that second part, is something different. For example, it might be explain the importance of the Warsaw Pact for relations between the Soviet Union and the satellite states. Now, if you don't read the question properly and write an answer on the 2 reasons for why the Warsaw Pact was important for relations between the superpowers, you're not going to get the marks, no matter how good your explanation is of how that event impacted upon relations between the superpowers. So it's really important, therefore, that you read the question and get in this habit of focusing on the extent to which X is important to Y. So when we're working out our answer, therefore, we need to consider, right, okay, what is the importance of this telegram to the relationships? And that, of course, brings us back to my magnificent diagram, which probably deserves a frame. Maybe I'll put it on eBay or something. And we're looking at, well, what are the consequences? What are the consequences, and which of these consequences are important to the relationship, and why? So really, we've got the importance of the relationship. We're going to look at how it affects relations between the superpowers. A massive one that needs to be included is the response of the East. So one importance of it that we can bring in is that we've got the issue of it increases, confirms fear of Western intentions to attack Soviet security. Okay? That's how it is interpreted. And in terms of the evidence to support that, we have plenty of evidence to indicate that that is what the impact was. Now, if it's increased fear of Western intent to attack Soviet security, what is the impact on the relationship? And this is a bit that's really important for you to have. So therefore, the impact on the relationship is to lead to reduced trust and cooperation between the two powers. So that's one aspect of importance that we can include. The other aspect of importance in terms of how the long telegram leads to an impact on their relationship is this aspect. Added in from the Iron Curtain speech, the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Aid, they can be seen as a response to this idea that the Soviet Union are aiming to attack capitalism. So therefore it is important, and the onus rests upon the United States to defend capitalism. And the only way they can defend it is by being strong towards the Soviet Union. So therefore, we can say that it guides Western policy to challenge Soviet actions as they consider the USSR to be seeking to destroy capitalism. Now, again, that in itself is good, but what you're going to need to do is to identify how does this actually affect, what is the level, how important, how does this have an impact on that relationship. So clearly here, the relationship in terms of particularly from the American angle towards the Soviets, again, it's almost like a repeat, but with a different impetus. In this case, it is that we've got the US openly hostile to Soviet actions which leads the two powers to act. Oh, sorry, let me change that. To perceive, which means to look at, the other as an enemy. Okay, so we've seen the development of these now what we might describe as hostile camps, these two groups who are going to challenge each other, and that forms the basis of the Cold War. And of course, the importance here is that that has stemmed from George Kennan's long telegram, and we've got specific examples to support that as well. Now, what's really important, of course, is that when we are looking at these impact, in terms of the impact on each nation, that we think about what words we'd use to describe the impact. So we might say, right, reducing the trust and cooperation between the two powers. So we can describe it as having a damaging impact or a souring impact. Okay. And this US openly hostile to Soviet actions, we might describe this as a provocative impact, or maybe a divisive impact. Okay? So how do we actually write this? How do we make this excellent thinking, how do we put that into an exam answer? Let's have a look. So the first one that we're going to look at, of course, is this idea of the impact of confirming Stalin's fear of Western intentions to attack Soviet security. Okay. So, begin. Right, what I want to do straight away, of course, is get the language of the question in there to make it really clear to the examiner that this is what I'm thinking about. I need to stay focused on this particular area, this particular issue. There is no need for me to write a summary of the entire long telegram. There's no need for me to write a narrative of events during this period. I want to be clear and concise on this particular question. So I'm going to start with the long telegram written by George F. Kennan in 1946. Notice I'm thinking with my AO1s, I'm showing the examiner that I know who wrote it and I know when it was. I have a good grasp and understanding of this period, and I'm going to show it to you because that is going to get me marks on the AO1. The long telegram written by George F. Kennan in 1946 was important as it effectively confirmed the fears of Stalin that the strategy of Truman's America was to plot the destruction of the Soviet Union. Okay? The telegram in warning of future Soviet hostility towards capitalism made Stalin feel this was an attempt to justify the attack he now expected from the United States and her allies. To illustrate the damage to relations between the former wartime allies, Novikov was instructed by Stalin to respond with his own telegram refuting, which means basically saying you're talking nonsense, refuting Kennan's claim and portraying America as the major threat to world peace. Okay. Now, we can go further. There isn't a need, as I said, to talk about the whole narrative, but I think it's worth, given what we know about the context, in just showing that we're aware that this division continues, and this split and this relationship never recovers, certainly not until arguably the 1970s, although even then I think it's fair to say that it never gets back to where it was during the Second World War. So I think it's worth adding a line just to reference that. But, and this is really important, this is 8 marks. It is not worth you writing a side of A4, pouring out loads of detailed evidence, because you can't get more than 8 marks. So let's keep it clear. Let's make sure that we're meeting what is being asked of us. So I'm going to add in here the souring of relations became permanent, and Stalin constructed Cominform and Comecon in order to have greater control over his defense against the West. Okay? Now, there's a fair bit there, but I don't think it's ridiculous. I don't think that's a crazy amount to remember. I don't think it's riddled with lots of difficult things to remember. I think it's quite logical and quite rational. So that's one of our points. The second point, and of course we can look at it, again, we're still looking at the impact on the two, but we're going to have a look at it from the perspective of a bit more of the United States perspective. So the impact of it on Western policy, challenging Soviet actions as they consider the USSR to be seeking to destroy capitalism. The impact on the relationship is as important because it appears to be the United States acting provocatively and divisively in terms of that relationship. So let's have a look. We'll follow the same sort of approach. Remember, the contents of the telegram is the understanding of force and the rejection of capitalism. And the consequences are the Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, the Truman Doctrine, and martial aid, ultimately the policy of containment. So let's come back and see where we can include that. Remember our AO1. So in this first part, we've got who wrote the telegram. We've got when it was written. We've got our key aspects in terms of Novikov writing the long telegram. Later on in the same year, you could include. So there's plenty in there. Cominform, Comecon. We're showing we understand the context. So let's carry on. So you could put a second reason why it was important if you want to take that route. I'm not going to. I'm going to be a bit more flexible in my writing. So relations between the two powers were in many ways shaped by the long telegram, whose importance can be seen in its influence on US foreign policy and resulting divisive impact on and device's impact on the relationship. For example, there's nothing wrong with a for example. For example, Kennan's response to the, and this is where I'm going to demonstrate for AO1 my knowledge of what's going on, the context. Kennan's response to the US Treasury's questioning of the Soviet rejection of the World Bank included not only the assertion or explanation, however you want to put it, the assertion that the Soviets were aggressively seeking to undermine capitalism, but that it was necessary for the Western response to be based on force rather than compromise. Evidence of this can be seen in Churchill's 1946 Iron Curtain speech, Truman's announcement of his, his doctrine to defend free people and ultimately the Marshall Aid Plan which would reduce the attraction of communism by rebuilding Europe as a capitalist democracy. Okay, again, I need to make sure that I'm now, having talked about this, that I'm talking about the impact on the actual relationship between the two. Okay. This strategy of containment was viewed as aggressive by Stalin and provoked both sides to view the other as the enemy. Okay, so again, reflecting on it, we've got evidence of knowing what the telegram was about, US Treasury, World Bank. We've got evidence of knowing who was involved in it, Truman, Kennan, Stalin. We've got evidence of knowing the impact on Western policy, Truman Doctrine, Iron Curtain speech, Marshall Aid, and we've clearly described the importance. That in itself, those elements do reflect what would be a full mark answer. Again, it might look like a lot when I zoom out there, but I don't think you need to view it as that. It is really, in terms of the thinking, all the thinking has already been done in our planning. And I would strongly urge you, if you found this method useful, to take this approach in your revision. You won't sit there in the exam hall and draw pictures for your plan. I think that wouldn't be a productive use of your time. However, if you use this visual method now, it means that when you do come to the examinations or even just the exam question practice in lessons, you will link back in your mind to these kind of visual diagrams, which in turn, I hope, will actually make it easier for you to transfer it into top quality writing. As an aside, and just away from the question, but I think worth noting, is something that I didn't find out for a long time, but I think is really useful and interesting, is that Kennan actually, although he wrote the long telegram, when Truman puts it into practice with this increasing hostility towards the Soviet Union, Kennan actually is an outspoken critic of the US government. He criticizes the policy, and actually when the next Secretary of State comes in, a guy called Dean Acheson, Kennan kind of gets completely sidelined and ultimately is no longer listened to as an expert once they find that he's being critical rather than entirely supportive of what the United States do. So I have a little bit of sympathy with George F. Kennan, and he is somebody who I think is extremely influential, extremely important. Died, I think it was 2009, I think, around that sort of time, and is certainly an individual worth having a look at. Very interesting man. But from your point of view, hopefully you found that useful. If you have questions which come up from that, do please get in contact and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.